Three of the most commonly used filters in Photoshop are the Unsharp Mask, the Smart Sharpen, and the High Pass filters. They're all used to help prepare our images to look their best when they're printed or when they're viewed on screen. Let's take a look at these different filters to see when we might want to use one over another. Now I'm going to zoom into 100% using Command 1 on the Mac or Control 1 on Windows, just so that I can see the effect of the filter at 100%. In order to apply them non-destructively, I'll choose Filter and then Convert for Smart Filters. Then I'm going to make 2 additional copies by using Command J on the Mac, Control J on Windows to duplicate the layer. I'll target the layer 1, the bottom layer, turn off the visibility for the other layers, and we'll just rename this USM for Unsharp Mask. Then from the Filter menu, I'll choose Sharpen and Unsharp Mask. There are 3 options here: the amount, the radius, and the threshold. The amount is the amount of contrast that we're going to be adding to the image, because sharpening really is just a trick. It's a way to fool your eye into thinking that your image is sharper by adding contrast along the edge of an object in an image. So as I increase the amount, we can see the added contrast along the edges in the image. Now the radius determines how many pixels on each side of an edge the amount is added to. So when I bring this down, we barely see any effect, but as I increase the radius, every time Photoshop finds an edge, it's now going to add this amount to almost 4 pixels on either side of the edge, and we'll start to see this haloing effect. Then we have the threshold slider. And the threshold slider is meant to suppress the sharpening in the areas of an image that don't have as much contrast. So maybe skin tone, or in this case, in the smaller areas of each one of these portions of the succulent. So as I bring that over, we can see that they get smoother. All right, so obviously this is way too much. I'm going to bring down the amount slider. Let's try it somewhere around 100. Bring down the radius somewhere between maybe 1.5 and 2. Now, I'm not sure if you're going to be able to see that effect once the video is compressed, so I might just bring it up for the sake of the video to somewhere like that. Again, I think that's going to be a little bit overkill if I was actually going to print. That's going to be a pretty thick radius, and we're probably going to see that halo effect. But for now, I'll click OK, and let's move to the next layer. Now, this layer, I want to apply Smart Sharpen, so I'll rename it to Smart. And then from the Filter menu, I'll choose Sharpen again, but this time Smart Sharpen. So Unsharp Mask has been around for a really long time. So Unsharp Mask is still the most popular method to sharpen, but Smart Sharpen, although it's newer, it actually has quite a number of distinct advantages. So under the hood, the edge detection in Smart Sharpen produces far less in the way of those halos that I was mentioning when you increase the radius and you increase the amount. And there's also a broader range of sharpening that's available, so you have a little bit more control with Smart Sharpen. At the top here, we have the same 2 options here. We have the amount, which is the amount of contrast, and the radius, which is how many pixels it's being applied to. But below that, we have a reduce noise option. And under that, we can tell it what to remove, either a Gaussian blur, a lens blur, or a motion blur. So Gaussian blur is going to remove a blur that's not due to noise or motion. So say, for example, you went in and you transformed your image and you rotated a little bit. That's going to soften the image. That's a little bit of a blur. And the Gaussian option can help sharpen that kind of blur. The lens blur is going to try to sharpen a blur or remove a blur that's caused by a lack of depth of field. And the motion, when we select that, we actually have an angle slider so that we can determine the angle of the blurring that we're trying to remove. But for this example, I'll move it back to the Gaussian blur. And underneath that, we have an option for shadows as well as highlights that have a fade and a tonal and a radius setting. So the fade determines how much we're going to suppress the amount of sharpening that we've added above in those shadow areas. So if I bring the fade amount down to the left, it's really just saying, hey, just fade it a little bit. And then the tonal width could say, just in the very dark shadow areas because there might be a lot of noise there. Or I might say, nope, go ahead and fade it up into those mid-tone areas. And then the radius is going to determine how many of the edge pixels is actually going to be affected by that fade. And we have the same options there for the highlights as well. If you find that you're using Smart Sharpen often with the same settings, you can also choose to save a preset, and then it will appear here on the list. All right, for now, I'll leave it at that, and we will move to the third option here, which is the high pass filter. So we'll just rename this HP for high pass. And from the filter menu, this time we want to go down to the other option and then choose high pass. The high pass filter is another powerful way that we can sharpen images. It's actually an edge detection filter, and anything that it detects as not being an edge, it's going to turn to gray. So as I move this up to the right, we can see that it's actually getting more and more realistic, or it looks more and more like the image. I really want it to not have those soft edges, so I'm going to bring it down somewhere between 2 and 3. Of course, the great thing is I can apply this, and then because it's a smart filter, just like all the other ones, we can change the settings as need be. But I'll leave it down to 3.4, click OK, and then in order to remove this gray, I'm going to use a blend mode. So to the right of the high pass filter, I'll double click on the icon there, and then for blend mode, I can either choose the overlay blend mode, which will give me a little bit more contrast, or I can choose soft light, which will give me a little bit more of a subtle effect. In this case, I'll choose overlay, click OK, and then if I need to go in and make changes to any of these filters, I can double click on the filter name. In this case, I'm just going to bring it down a little bit. It's a little bit too strong for the monitor that I'm viewing it on, but again, it's going to depend on how much this video gets compressed and how you're viewing it. Maybe you're just on a phone, in which case you may not be able to see it as accurately, so I would highly suggest that you experiment around with values on your own. So there you go, several different ways to sharpen your images depending on the look that you're trying to achieve.